This is Where Did the Road Go? Our aim is to explore the fringe, to be true skeptics and question openly, to investigate the paranormal, bring light to the dark corners of history, and give a voice to the shunned of science. We deal in mystery and the important questions that these subjects bring to light. What is reality? Who are we? And why are we here? Join us on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com for a full show archive, links to all our social media, upcoming schedule, and much, much more. Now, join your host Soraya on this week's edition of Where Did the Road Go?
And as usual, I am joined by my co-host Luke.
Always a pleasure.
And we have something pretty special for you tonight. We're going to get to in a moment. I do want to make one comment. Someone had left a comment off of that intro, kind of laughing at the open-minded, or the question, or be skeptical and question with an open mind, or however it's said in the intro. And as anyone who listens to this show knows, there is a big difference between the people who call themselves skeptics and actual skepticism. Skepticism is not debunking, and most skeptics are debunkers. At least the people who, go out and publicize themselves as skeptics are people trying to trying to keep the status quo. And a real skeptic doesn't necessarily set on any one idea and take it as dogma. A real skeptic questions everything, especially their own beliefs. So to be a skeptic and question openly is exactly what a real skeptic should do. And just in case anyone doesn't get that, because I know the term skeptic is thrown around so easily nowadays and misused so easily by people who are complete debunkers who are not actually skeptics. So, tonight we are talking for the first time with Mr. John Chewter. And are you with us, John?
I am. I guess that's me told then.
That is you. And you have some research you've been doing along with your wife and some other people that no one really knows anything about.
Well, some people in the UK know about it, but most people in the States really have no idea about it. And
this is a comet that came through in 562 AD.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll come back to that date in a moment.
Okay. Yeah, we need you to set the give us the setting and the way things were back then.
Okay, well, the first thing I'm going to say is that there are 3 dates for the comet, or a comet, or several comets in the record. We're talking 562, 534, and 1 2 years later. And you'll find a lot of people who go looking for this comet, get the wrong one, and it'd get mixed up a bit. So there was a lot of stuff in the sky around those times. So I would just put a question mark over 562. Maybe it was a few years earlier. But okay. Right. Now, the year 562, the Romans had basically disappeared not too long ago, about 100 years before. The Romans had come to Britain largely for resources, tin, copper, that kind of thing, lead, trading with the Cornish. Before them, the Phoenicians had been doing that. The Romans took over the trade, and they were doing a roaring trade with the Welsh, the Cornish, and taking minerals out. So they invaded England and they subjected most of England. They didn't actually get the bit they were after, which was Cornwall, because they were a fairly stroppy lot and put up a fierce fight. So the Romans kind of gave up and just started trading with them like they used to before, and just slapped a tax on it and carried on like before. So that was pretty all right with the Romans, and they just left them alone and they started taking over Britain. Meanwhile, we have a church being set up in the UK which was probably, I say it was, before the Roman Church really got started. And we had a religious centre centred around Wells, Glastonbury and or Cardiff, which is just across the River Severn in Wales. I mean, over here, that makes a big difference now. One's in Wales, one side of the river's in Wales, the other side isn't. It's a couple of miles across. It's quite wide. They put a bridge over it, but it's one of the biggest bridges in the world. But nevertheless, you can get from one to the other in a day in a boat and a couple of horses. It's not that far apart. So we had a religious centre going on there. The Romans kind of came and went, and maybe they took our version of Christianity with them and adopted it and melded it in, and maybe they didn't. It doesn't matter. But nevertheless, there was an established English Christian church there, which has its roots not anything to do with Rome, which will come into play later on. So we have a bus service running stuff into the Far East from Tyre and Sidon into the UK. That's still going pretty well, pretty swimmingly. Everybody's making quite a lot of money. The Romans have a lot of trouble with the Celts in Northern Europe, who overwhelmed the walls again and again, and eventually the legions are pulled out of Britain, and Britain's left to fend for itself, or so we're told. So one day, I'm about 14 and I'm in school and I'm listening to all this stuff. Okay, so the Romans have gone. Yep. And then the Anglo-Saxons and the Vikings and all these guys came in. Yep. And they built cities next to the Roman cities. And I'm thinking to myself, being a lazy fellow, why on earth would you do that? I mean, you've got all this town and forum and basilica and temples and stuff, and these guys come along, and I'm told they build Viking cities, Anglo-Saxons, well, we call them cities, small towns by today's standards, and they build them next door to it, and they pull all the stone out and they build these new towns. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, I'm a lazy fellow. I would just go in, take the place over, get some paint, put a few roses round the door, call it home, bish bash bosh, job done. I mean, who wouldn't?
And you see that around the world too.
Well, yeah, but in this case, I'm thinking, well, why would they do that? I mean, it's only 100. This comet arrived in 562 AD, or 10 years earlier, or thereabouts, and so we're only talking about 100 years after the Romans move out. Now, you look around in any of your old established cities, you know, Boston, whatever, on the East Coast, and 100-year-old buildings are holding up pretty well. The roof's still on, probably, and if it's not, you could fix it, but they didn't. They built stuff next door. And that always puzzled me, and I was told, well, and as soon as the Romans went, all the roads went to rubbish and fell apart, and they didn't bother with it, and they used their old tracks, and maybe they'd use the Roman roads, and maybe they wouldn't. And I'm thinking, well, I'm a lazy kind of guy. It's easier to fix up a road than build a new one or use an old one. What's going on? So that always sat at the back of my mind. And I thought, this is rather odd. This doesn't sound right. And then, I don't know now, it must be 15 years ago or so, I started watching a channel in the UK called Edge Media, or the Controversial Channel, which was belonging to Edge Media. Great show run by a guy called Theo Chalmers, who I still talk to this day. And he had a couple of guys on called Wilson and Blackett, who really were the start of a lot of the thinking and work I've been doing for the last 10 years or more in my spare time. And these are two guys, a Welsh guy and a guy from the north on the east side. They're very different characters, and they get on like a house on fire. And they started digging around some of these mysteries, and I'm sitting there, and they said, this comet, there was a comet in 562 AD. And I thought, I never heard of that. Yeah, and it streaked down Britain and set it on fire end to end. And the place burned continuously, the whole country, for 11 days.
Wow.
And I thought, well, this might explain quite a lot. And then the other thing I didn't understand was we've got Roman history running full tilt. You know, you can practically go to any large building in the UK and you can probably find out what was in it from some record somewhere, because the Romans were meticulous record keepers.
Right.
And the whole of history stopped just after the Romans left, and basically we hear the best part of nothing until 800 or so, when Bede, the venerable Bede, who was, I guess, from Viking blood, arrived on the east coast, or his parents did, found himself in a monastery, and he started writing the history of Britain. And between those two dates, there is almost nothing written, I was told in school, between those two dates, and we call those the Dark Ages. And after Bede, almost nothing is written down, a few bits and pieces here and there, until the Normans come along and catalogue absolutely everything, right down to how many sheep an individual farm's got in the back end of nowhere. So all of a sudden we've got, from everything being recorded until about 460 AD, until somewhere around middle 700s, almost nothing's recorded. And then there's a bit of a jump, and then the Normans write everything down, and we call those the Dark Ages. So I started researching what this event was, the 562 Comet. And Wilson and Blackett have done an incredible amount of work. I mean, it is unbelievably good. I can't give these guys enough credit. They are lampooned, just like in your standard intro, Soraya. I mean, they are spurned. And yet everything they've told me with a reference that I've checked out, and I haven't checked all of them out because they have thousands of references in their books. Unlike most of these wishy-washy things, I think Cygnus is this, Leo is that, blah, 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 blah. Trust me, I'm an author. These guys are full of footnotes, cross notes, references, where these parchments are, which museum they're in, which parish hall they're in, which floor they're in, which cabinet they're in. And I tried a few out, not many, but they were exactly where these guys said it was. So I thought, okay, well, that's a good base. Now, these guys got in quite a lot of trouble with the authorities for, well, that's a whole different show, and they ought to be telling the story. But enough to say they got in quite a bit of trouble, right?
All right.
I mean, these guys really upset the establishment because they started rewriting British history. I mean, to the core. And strange things started happening, like their house kept getting burnt down.
Oh.
And it's their story. You get hold of Alan Wilson, see if you can get him on. You'll have a great story.
All right.
But that really has nothing much to do with the comet, apart from these guys did basically all the spade work over 20 odd years, meticulous finding. Now, they weren't trying to find the comet. They were trying to find the truth behind King Arthur, what all that was about, the famous King Arthur. They were trying to find out about the Holy Grail connected to him. They were trying to find out about the Ark of the Covenant and, well, basically the whole of the alternative history movement is what they were trying to find out about.
Right.
In the middle of this, they trip over this 562 Comet. Okay, now, the story starts somewhere in Norway. Now, the Norwegians now occupy about the left quarter of Scandinavia, yeah? But in those days, they occupied most of what Sweden is today and the top bit of Denmark. But that wasn't, you know, well, that's what they did then. And they, in their writings, which had to be tracked down through Iceland, which I'll come to, they found a bright light appeared in the sky, lit the place up, cast shadows. So I guess it must have been dark. And if it was light, it was really light because this bright light was casting shadows.
Right, right.
It comes screaming over Norway and it disappears in the direction of Great Britain. And they call it the Great Britain Comet. But obviously they've got different words for it because they've got their own language. I'm not even going to start trying to pronounce their stuff. It's like herding cats or knitting smoke. I mean, it's if you can recognise half of the letters in it, you're doing well.
Right.
So anyway, they've got this thing, and the story went over, and well, actually, I've missed a bit out because I started out with their stuff, and they hadn't mentioned Norway. These guys mentioned that it was seen in Scotland, it was seen in Carlisle. Now, people in America don't really know where many places are in Britain, and to be fair, I don't know where many places are in America. but you guys have seen pictures of the UK, and it's vaguely triangular. And if you measure about halfway down the UK and draw a line through it, that's almost where the Scottish border is. Most people think Scotland is a little thing on the end of England, but actually it's a vast, empty, beautiful wilderness, and it comes about halfway down the length of the UK. It really does.
Right.
So draw a line about halfway through, and there's a very thin bit of the UK there at that point. And pretty much there is a place called Carlisle. It's just 20 minutes walk from Hadrian's Wall. It's right on the edge of Hadrian's Wall. If you've ever seen that on a map, that's where it is. There's a big report there that the comet was seen overhead, and depending on your interpretation of the words, it would appear to have split into three pieces overhead at roughly Carlisle. And it was low. It was really low, and it scared the heck out of everybody.
I'm sure.
Right. Now, this comet, one piece, went right down the length of Britain. There was a guy, let me just make sure I've got the right guy. There's a guy in France called Gregory de Tours, and he was, I think he worked in an abbey, and he was some sort of recorder, and he wrote about this in a year later, and there are quite a few reports. There's 32 reports around Europe describing this whole event. This is not an isolated event. It covers countries. Anyway, this thing, it swept down England, and it, quote, swept England with fire from end to end. Gregory, who was in Brittany, which is across the Channel, now that's a fair step. That's about 80 to 100 miles, depending which bit of Brittany and which bit of England you want to choose. But, you know, it's a fair step. He said the sky was like daylight for 11 days.
Wow.
and he was talking about Britain. He wasn't talking about France.
Right.
So he could see across 80 odd miles, you and me, a glow in the sky for 11 days. So the stories go that it set the place on fire from end to end, and according to other sources, 2 million people, round figures, died.
Wow.
2 million. I mean, that is a world-class catastrophe, but it all happened pretty much isolated on one island.
Right, right.
So it didn't get fed in. There aren't many, apart from this guy Gregory of Tours in France, I can't find any other eyewitnesses from France who said they saw anything. Nobody in Germany saw anything. Nobody in the Frankish, well, you with me, it was a fairly local, like a channel, you with me, something coming down, cutting a swathe, probably 80 to 100 miles across as it came down Britain, maybe wider, but it wasn't like hundreds of miles wide. It was fairly local. And so it set all that on fire. So many people were killed, and the king at the time survived. He scrapes together what he can, and he takes however many he can, and he manages to get across to France. At first I thought he went to Normandy because that's the obvious place to go, because it's the nearest point, but they didn't. They set out of Cardiff, which is in probably Cardiff and God knows how many other places as well, but they from basically south of England, and they sailed across the channel, and they ended up in Brittany, about 5,000 of them. Bit of a shock to the French. 5,000 people is probably half of the population of the whole of Brittany at the time. So they turn up, and the name of this king is King Arthur.
Okay.
And he turned up with his knights. Now, as soon as anybody says King Arthur, they get treated with ridicule and scorn.
Sure.
One of the main reasons for that is that there was a guy called Geoffrey of Monmouth. Now, Monmouth is a anglicised now town in the very south east of Wales. It's pretty much opposite Bristol, if anybody knows where Bristol is. Doesn't matter if you don't. But Geoffrey of Monmouth set about writing an English history, one of the earliest attempts after the Romans. There was a guy called Bede who had an attempt before that we'll come back to. Geoffrey of Monmouth basically wrote down the stories of King Arthur, and it would appear he got it all mixed up. Well, not all mixed up, but he got some of it mixed up. As soon as you mention King Arthur, all the historians go, "Oh, Geoffrey of Monmouth, rubbish."
Right.
You can't believe him. You can't believe a word he says. I mean, if Arthur was, the guy he says he was, he would have lived for 400 years, or 200 years. Well, yeah, that's kind of true. He would have been, over 200 years. But there were two King Arthurs. And Wilson and Blackett prove, well, to my satisfaction, they've got a Welsh genealogy based out of Welsh writing, which a lot of people will tell you there is no Welsh writing, but there is Welsh writing. It got banned.
Really?
No, it got banned. It got banned when basically the English took the place over. They banned the Welsh language, they banned the Welsh writing, and they managed to batter it down to, well, about 110,000 speakers from a huge number, and they were trying to wipe it out. I mean, even when I was a kid, they were trying to wipe it out. Basically, they said, well, we should all be speaking English. Now, this is a bit of a diversion, but this is local to me in my lifetime. The Welsh were having none of it. And a lot of English people who had a lot of money were going to Wales because it's very cheap to buy a property, because the only way of earning any money if you're not in one of the cities is to raise sheep, and there's no money in that. So people would come along and they would pay twice what the going locals could afford, buy a place with a nice view, pay somebody 10p to look after the sheep or get rid of the sheep. And you know, they were taking down all the old Welsh signs, and the Welsh had a backlash. And basically, if you were an English person with a Welsh house, they burnt it down. They did a lot of it. They burnt a lot of houses down in the 60s.
Wow.
And, talk about a statement. And now, if you go to Wales, you'll find every street sign is in Welsh and English. And if they put one up here only in English, it'll only be up 10 minutes because somebody will chop it down. No, I mean, really, they will chop it down.
Nice.
So they're a very fierce lot. Anyway, so the Welsh had a language. The Welsh had a written language. And when the Normans came in with the papacy and all the rest of it, they did their very best to forbid writing, ban it, burn it, destroy it, where it was on rocks, get rid of it, it's the writings of the devil, wipe it out. Ethnic cleansing. They didn't manage it. Quite a lot survives. Alan Wilson, who's a Welsh speaker, he's managed to dig up things out of old parish church records, so all sorts of strange places, museums, and managed to put an awful lot of this back together. I won't get into the details of all the people who did it and who wrote what, but because we're beginning to, I'm already behind where I thought I'd be by now. So,
all right.
So we have this this report. 2 million people died. Now, what else do we know? We know that if people went into the place where this event had happened and you drank the water, you died. If your horse drank the water, it died. Everything died. The plants died. Pretty much nothing grew there for, depending on sources, 11 to 15 years. So you can imagine there's a recovery after about 12 years, I guess, yeah?
Right.
And King Arthur's, if you look in the King Arthur tales, you'll find that these are referred to as the Badlands.
Okay.
So King Arthur goes across to France, keeps his head down till it's, well, he thinks it's safe to come back, and they do ventures into this dangerous bit. A lot of them don't survive, and a lot of their stories that you've got from King Arthur II are forays into this, a bit of a Mad Max world, if you like, yeah?
Right.
So, so Arthur finds himself in France, 5,000 people, and they're all hungry, and they need some help.
Right.
So they say, okay, well, let's ask the Pope. So they send off somebody to ask the Pope for some help. And the Pope comes back with this famous thing that I've heard everywhere, and I cannot nail the original source down. So anybody out there who knows where it is, I'd love to hear it. But there's a famous quote that says that the Pope declared that stones could not fall from heaven because there were no stones in heaven. Therefore, this was heresy, and he denied any aid because it was obviously rubbish, because it was heresy. All right, so far?
Yep. And you have scientists saying the same thing in the late 1800s, so...
Yeah. So there's, stones can't fall from heaven, and there was a papal ruling on that, which was repealed in 1811, I think, when a shower of meteorites fell on Paris and embarrassed everybody. So they decided there probably was. So the Pope didn't send any aid. 2 million people died. Probably a lot of those could have been saved if there had been fresh food and water and all that.
Right.
And they were expecting an armada of ships, you know, from all along the Mediterranean, all sending a couple of boats with some fresh food and stuff. No, nothing happened. Now, the Pope declared that everywhere through the whole of, because this was heresy, all references to it were ordered to be destroyed.
Huh.
So he orders them all to be destroyed, and he gets the letters and the missives, as they call it. You want me, a great big pile of requests and what they need and why they need it. He orders them destroyed. He then orders everywhere who's got a copy of anything to do with this destroyed, because it's heresy and we won't suffer heresy. Right, now a cynic might say, not being a cynic obviously, these were the wrong sort of Christians. These were ones from the English Catholic Church. They weren't Roman Catholics. So he had an opportunity. And he wasn't going to help the people from, basically, they weren't from Peter's church. This is from the church of, one could argue Jesus, one could argue Joseph of Arimathea. But anyway, they weren't from Peter's.
Right.
Or to that matter, Paul's. Actually, they might have been Paul's, but that's a whole different program. Right. So they've got no help, they've got no nothing, they're starving to death. What on earth can they do? Well, not very much. So one lot of them decides to stay put and make the best of it and work their way back into England, which they do, which is Arthur II. His brother, Madoc, has a different idea. And he sets about building 700 ships. It's written down, 700. That's quite a lot. All right, they weren't very big, but 700 of them.
Right.
Yeah, and he builds these somewhere around Cardiff, which I find slightly odd because that would appear to be pretty close to where the flight path had been.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess if they got fresh water and there's a lot of timber around after that, then, you know, maybe whatever. Anyway, he then sets off sail westwards to another land across the sea. Well, he didn't go to Ireland. Now, we know that the people in the north of England who could get on a boat went to Ireland, but we know that Madoc didn't.
Okay.
Because he would have shown up, because he was royalty.
Right.
And the Irish were writing everything down in Ogham, right? And he's not there. And they went west, 700 ships. And they're away, Madoc, his brother, is away for, hang on, let me think, 10, 12 years, something like that.
Okay.
He comes back with just a few people. And he comes back with lots of tales of these lands beyond the sea and these magical adventures they had, and what a jolly good time they all had. And most of them decided to stay because it was so nice. Okay?
All right.
Right. About this time, probably, in the River Ohio, appear a white tribe with blonde hair and or red hair, or both. And it's quite well documented. And if you want to go and have a look around the Louisville area, you'll find lots of references in the Indian culture and poetry about these strange people that came from across the sea. The English settlers, when they arrived, were quite surprised to find themselves ambushed by white men. Well, they were, you know, in full war paint and bows and arrows. And some guy decided to call this whole lot winds, which I guess you in America know more about than me. They called them white Indian Negroes.
Huh. I've never heard that term before.
Yeah.
Well, I've just found it in the research. I mean, I don't know how true it is or whatever, but that's what I found.
Huh.
Because they were classifying people, right? I mean,
Right.
They like doing that. So, how would they get there? Well, Wilson and Blackett say, oh, well, you know, what they would have done is followed the old Phoenician route and gone up round the top of Iceland and down, and then ran Florida and up the Mississippi. And I'm thinking, me being a lazy bloke, that's a lot of work. I mean, I wouldn't be doing that.
Right.
I mean, right. Now, if you come out of Britain, we have a predominantly westerly wind. I don't know how many of you guys sail, but if you've got a westerly wind, you can tack at 90 degrees to the wind with ease, right? So you can go 90 degrees to the wind easily. Right, that means you can go south easily. Now, if you go south from Britain, even in a modest sailing boat for 2 days, you'll end up somewhere near the Canary Islands off the coast of Africa. It doesn't take long. The current's taking you along. The wind's taking you along. It's a constant wind. It's easy, right?
Okay.
And then if you just hoist the sail and do nothing at all, almost certainly you're going to end up in the Caribbean in about 10 to 14 days.
Okay.
Because that's where the current takes you and that's
Right.
where the wind takes you. And that's what they used to do. They used to come down from Britain with manufactured goods. They'd drop them off in Portugal or whatever. And they continue down to Africa, drop off some more manufactured goods, pick up slaves, follow the wind straight across the Atlantic, drop off the slaves, pick up any crops that they've got, sail up the coast of New York and then back to Bristol. So basically they went round in a circle because that's the way the winds went and that's the way the current went.
Okay.
Right? So if I was them and I knew what I was doing, and I think they knew what they were doing because they were dealing with the Phoenicians, and the Phoenicians appear to have had dealings with the Far East and were doing the dope run for the Egyptian pharaohs, amongst other things. I would have followed them. You and me, it would have been easy. And out of those 700 boats, you'd probably get nearly all of them across. Yeah, because if you did it that way, it'd be fairly easy. And once you're in the Gulf of Mexico, which is where you'd end up, you just got the Mississippi, wouldn't you? Know, it's a lot easier than fighting it all the other way round. So I think Wilson and Blackett are wrong on that one. But that explains how they could end up there. So I then had a look at this and I thought, okay, so we've got a trajectory here. Now I did this calculation I did some years ago, and I've talked about it quite a bit, and I've noticed that other people have done the same calculation since, and maybe independently, and good luck on them. I don't really mind. But I did some great circle plots. I've got some great circle plot software. I plotted where the points were that we know that they were, so I could find out some trajectory. Now, and then I plotted it backwards, and I thought, well, it must end up in Norway. It must have started in Norway. Must have come from Norway. And we find, yes, the stories in the children, they know that. The Swedes kicked them out. They had to disappear to Iceland, which they did. Most of all the records and stuff were taken to Iceland, where they basically hidden salt for quite a long time.
Huh.
Yeah, and then they did a comeback and kicked the Swedes out of about a third of Norway, which is basically to a mountain boundary. Yeah, and re-established themselves and brought their books back with them, and which explains why I can only find references in the Norwegian piece when it should be really right across Sweden.
Right.
But the reason I can't find it in Sweden is the Swedes weren't there then, yeah? They were far more to the east, so that explains that. So then I start plotting it the other way. And Arthur Wilson who I'd love to have a beer with sometime, but I can't get hold of him. I've tried and I've emailed it. They don't write. They don't call. Anyway, and he said, well, of course, there are references in the same year to this in the New World in South America. So, and he said, well, Bolivia, they had a bit of a problem in Bolivia and stuff. So, hang on. So I do this plot, and I go, okay, we know it was seen over Oslo. We know where Oslo is. We know it's split in Carlisle into 3 pieces. Okay, we know where Carlisle is. We know it went over, it then went down following a certain trajectory, and wherever it went, we find burnt rocks on hills. This is rather controversial. If you look at Arthur C. Clarke, he said, there's one big mystery that I never did understand, and when I've cracked that, I'll be happy, and that is there are glassified faults in Scotland.
Yeah, that's the vitrified structures.
Yeah, and when you look at them, they're vitrified further up. So the further you go down the structure, the less the glassifying is.
Huh.
Right?
And it takes an enormous amount of heat to vitrify a stone structure.
Yes, but if you take an enormous rock like that and you heat the whole thing, you with me, enormously, you're going to crack that thing to pieces, because you're going to get, the top is going to be much hotter than the bottom, and, you're going to get huge stresses. But that's not what happens. It's just like it's toasted. So it would appear that there was, it's not just me saying it, I mean, there's geologists saying it, the historians are having none of it, but that's another matter. The geologists are saying, well, there are several things that cause this sort of glassification, like lightning. But there's too much of it, because lightning's very local. It doesn't take a whole fort out and half a hillside. I mean, it takes out a couple of square meters, and that's your lot.
And there's a number of forts as well.
Yeah, not only in Scotland. There's also some. We have a mountain range goes kind of halfway down England from Scotland, called the Pennines, the backbone of England. When you look at it on the map, you see why. And along there we have some forts there as well, and they're vitrified as well. Okay, and then it goes down through South Wales, and we find vitrified forts on the top of the hills there as well. We don't find them in the valleys; we just find them on the top. And most of the historians say, oh, this is where people just set fire to the fort, and it got that hot, and you're thinking, really? 3,000 degrees, bits of wood, really? Yeah. It's a bit of a stretch. So we have that, right? So I did this great circle plot, and I started it at Carlisle, and I know it went over some forts in southern Wales, so I plotted across that. It breaks the Atlantic coast into Brazil, almost on its northern border. And guess what? We have stories of great lights in the sky and destruction. It carries on. I'll miss a gap out and come back to it. It carries on. In Bolivia, the same year, 562, we have dendro-dated destruction. Pyramids. A lot of them were made of mud. I mean, you hear about the great big ones made of, huge, enormous slabs the size of...
Right.
Well,
right. It fitted together
buildings.
Perfectly and such, yeah.
And all that stuff. Yeah. But apart from that, I mean, they had an awful lot of ones made of like mud brick, adobe,
Right.
And they all got destroyed 562. The trees stopped growing 562. Same date, same thing, same line. That's, I find, quite interesting. But that's not all. That's one of the piles of the three. So I plotted the second one. which shot off through Wales and, well, no, it didn't. It shot across a lot of Ireland because Ireland got scorched. It got set on fire, but nowhere near as much of it.
Ah.
If you look around in the stuff that's popular, you don't find that. But if you go looking in the records, it's there. And it basically clips across Ireland.
Okay.
So you do a great circle plot from where that came, and it goes straight over Mexico City. 562, thereabouts, they report this enormous light in the sky. Everybody's terrified. Crops failed for years. They make a special spiral symbol, unique, stick it on their pyramids.
Huh.
Yeah. And then their crops failed and things start falling apart and they all move out, and a lot of them move into North America. And they seem to end up in, one lot seem to end up 200 years later in Georgia.
Yes, yeah.
Where they built a similar structure.
Mm-hmm.
And put the same symbol on it.
Now, what does this symbol look like?
It's a kind of spiral thing. It's difficult to describe on the radio. I mean, you see spirals everywhere, but this one is, it starts at the right angle and it finishes at the same angle. It's just it's just a spiral that would appear to be aligned in a certain angle. Do you understand what I mean? Rather than random.
Yeah.
These people would appear, from other things I've read, to be genetically connected to the peoples of Middle America. In other words, the Americans walked down from Alaska down into South America, and some of them came back.
Right.
Yeah, reverse turn. Not all it's cracked up to be. So we find them there. What else do we find around there? Well, around there in the Ohio Valley, we find hill forts. Just like we have in southern England. We have dozens of them, probably 100 of them. They're all on the same footprint. They're all roughly the same size, within 200, 300%. You with me? They're roughly the same size. They're a village size, and we have exactly the same structures in the Ohio Valley that we have in South Wales.
Okay.
We got white people about the same. You with me? Blah, blah, blah. And so it goes on. So there would appear to be a refugee connection between this comet and people up there, and then a load of mess going on in Bolivia. And this is the one where I'm going to get crucified and trolled for years, okay?
All right.
Puma Punku.
Yes.
Right. I mean, it's the ultimate Lego kit, yeah?
Yeah, pretty much.
Do you have Lego in America?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So it's the ultimate Lego kit, isn't it? We've got industrial components, mass-produced somehow, join them all up together, and from what I can see, you can make everything from a space launcher to a garage. And I've seen pictures of temples made up from these things and rocket launchers made up from these blocks and so on. But they seem to be fairly useful things. But what is very strange is that these rocks are not monstrously large by world standards. But you're talking half a ton, 2 ton, 4 tons. I mean, reasonable pieces of rock.
Right, big enough.
Well, yeah, big enough like you need 10 people and ropes and, pretty big. I mean, they're not as big as the massive ones in Cusco, but they're pretty large blocks. And they seem to have been blown around like popcorn.
Yeah.
Now, what on earth could do that? Well, right on the money, we have a disaster in 562, or a few years before, if you want to get pedantic. I think a lot of it had to do with them changing calendars, by the way.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, but because they changed calendars twice in the UK, and dates got they got mixed up and things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They ended up with too many Easters and they had to chop 5 out. Get Smith. No, they did.
I know.
Yeah. So you've got all that going on. And you've got this comet arrives. We know that there was big devastation in Bolivia at that point. I've not seen anybody on the usual suspect sites mentioning this date. But the museums do. Now, what do we know about Puma Punku? Well, it looks like the whole thing was built of, styrofoam little blocks, and somebody got a hairdryer and just blew it, doesn't it? I mean, stuff just goes everywhere. And we do know that one end of the site and all the rest of it is covered in mud. Which came from Lake Titicaca, and which is only around the corner. I mean, from what I gather from Jerry Wills, who's I asked Jerry Wills to do some legwork for me, and he did, and I've done some legwork for him, and so so it goes on.
Right.
And he said, yeah, and he sort of dug down a handful or two. I mean, not in any sort of important site, but on the edge of a car park. I mean, we're not talking about World Heritage Site desecration here. And he comes up with, shells and mud and stuff you'd expect to find at the bottom of a lake or a river or something. So I'm just wondering if the thing comes over Bolivia, something really happens, because Bolivia seems to be in worse shape than Britain, actually. Yeah, because and my question is, did some of it fall in Lake Titicaca and form a mini tsunami that washed? I mean, it wouldn't need to be a very big one, because Lake Titicaca is only around the corner and there's nothing to stop it.
And I believe it was bigger back then as well than what it is today.
Well, it would have come right up to the edge of Tiwanaku and Puma Punku. So we're not talking. You don't need to. You want me? I mean, if you dumped a rock of a few hundred tons in the middle of that lake at high speed, I reckon that'd probably be enough.
Possibly, yeah. Or part of the rock could have also hit Puma Punku.
Yeah, but I'm also wondering about, because of the scattering, and we don't see like impacts and we don't see great lumps of nickel if we're talking about an airburst like Tunguska.
Right.
But nobody will talk to me again about that. Jerry Wills seemed to think, talking to people on the coast about some of the stories, that the main body probably fell in the sea some miles off the coast of Peru or Bolivia, somewhere near the border of the two, causing a local backsplash, which he thinks he may have found evidence of, or at least stories of. Okay. And it might have come quite a long way back up. I don't know. I mean, it needs a lot more work, and Jerry would like to go back and do some more, and but time and resources, and so it goes on.
Sure.
So basically, to kind of wrap the whole thing up, what happened? Well, Britain became fertile again. The water was able to be drunk again. There are certain geological reports I've read that say that some of the sediments in the lakes in the high countries in a limestone area contain reasonably high levels of things like selenium, which shouldn't be there. Lead shouldn't be there. Nickel, especially nickel, and a lot of iron. But there's a lot of iron up there anyway. So we have some more heavy elements than certainly a lot of water people would expect to find there.
Okay. Yep.
We have glassified rocks. We have an empty country. And then what happens? Well, the Vikings turn up right on cue. Lots of them. Thousands of them. Anglo-Saxons turn up. Thousands of them. and they find this green country largely empty, they said. Really? Took the place over. The Pope is his, I've forgotten his name now. Gone for the minute. The Pope, who's still the Pope, after 15 years, sends 12 years, 15 years, thereabouts, he sends St. Augustine to Christianise Britain. Because this is the same guy that said they couldn't have any help, yeah?
Right.
From what I can see, he waits till it's safe and sends his guys in. But meanwhile, there were a whole bunch of other guys, which is from another story, of these Christians who had been out in the Orkney Isles who had missed the comet because they were the other side of it. They come in, notably St. Cuthbert and a lot of other people, and they start trying to Christianise the Vikings and other people who had turned up and the remnants of the Brits who had presumably gone back home or survived or whatever. And they were quite surprised to find that there were lots of Christians there already, and they really didn't need a pope, thank you very much, and would you please all go away? Well, they weren't going to do that, and they said, well, we're the Roman Catholic Church and you aren't, and who are you anyway? And they said, well, we predate you by 70 years, and then it all went, well, screw you, and it all got interesting. And a guy called St. Cuthbert was left by the English Catholic or Scottish Catholic, but anyway, the British Catholic Church, to sort things out, and he kind of tried to smooth things over, and the rest of his party basically took their bat and ball home and weren't playing and never came back again. And then Rome basically took the place over, and in 150, hang on, how 150, how many years? That's 150 years. Bede, who was a writer of the time, a chronicler attached to a monastery, said the whole of Britain was a white carpet of churches. And that was the game over.
Huh.
So that's why your Angles, Saxons, Jutes and Vikings were able to take the place over so easily.
Okay, so if the first part hit...
you have to remember, this is a story. It's based on how far I've got so far. I'm sure bits of it are wrong. So,
right.
But
well, yeah.
Nevertheless, this is as far as I've got, and I've got no book to sell. So take it or leave it or follow it. Yeah.
Now the part that went down in Mexico. Is there any evidence where that ended?
It seemed to go over it.
Oh.
It didn't seem to collide with everything. It was pretty low, and the tops of some of the... I haven't been to check, but I'm told that some of the peaks of the pyramids and the mountains are glassified.
Okay.
But I haven't been there to verify it. I'm told it's the case. As soon as you find classification in high places, the establishment just starts saying lightning and don't stop saying lightning.
You would think they would accept a comet. I mean, it's not that outrageous of an idea.
Well, yeah, but if they start accepting the comet, they start have to accept that Geoffrey of Monmouth wasn't complete rubbish, and Talislow was, some of the Sulis and a few of the other writers at a point. I mean, at the moment, if you look at the official, no, it's not really fair. Some of the official people take this seriously. Not many, but some do. I can think of about 5 professors from my listings that absolutely think it happened, know it happened, see the evidence, here it is, nothing to argue about. You know what I mean? It's the historians that have the problem, because they've all been brought up with Geoffrey of Monmouth basically made it up.
Right.
Yeah?
Right.
And then you had Mallory, who goes to France, and he gets hold of the rest of the King Arthur stories that are hanging about, because he was in France. We know he was in France. Why was he in France? damn Comet in Britain. That's why he was in France. So he's off having adventures and rescuing maidens and catching his dinner and doing whatever he's doing in France until basically the whole thing calmed down and he went home.
Right, right.
So Mallory picked some stuff up from there. Geoffrey of Monmouth has got some stuff. They know Geoffrey of Monmouth got some stuff wrong because they know he's got stuff wrong. I know he's got stuff wrong. Right. I can see he's got stuff wrong. Anybody who can see the original source documents knows he got stuff wrong. That doesn't mean all the stories are wrong.
Right, right.
That means, some of it's wrong. Dates are wrong. Orders are wrong. This king was before that king. There was 2 King Arthurs. I mean, Wilson and Blackett have got this wonderful genealogical thing that will take you all the way from the year before Jesus, right through to the present day, showing how the whole thing was all joined up through, would you believe, 5 King Arthurs.
Huh.
I mean, there's some were more recent, but I mean, we had a King Arthur who was a king for, I don't know, it seemed like 10 minutes. He died. He wasn't around for long, you with me? We almost had a King Arthur recently, last century, not quite, but, there have been King Arthurs through our history. 2 of them. Wilson and Blackett's basic breakthrough is that they've turned up some original documents which show there were, well, at least to my satisfaction, 2 King Arthurs. One would appear to be the great-grandson of the other one. Hence, he can't possibly be King Arthur. He'd have to be 200 years old.
Right,
no,
right.
Not if there are 2 King Arthurs. And so on and so on. And we've got all this wonderful thing, and it really upsets the apple cart. And then you've got to ask yourself, well, going back to my original question, I'm sitting back in my classroom. Why did they build these towns next to the other towns? I don't know, Sally this. Now, Sally's my wife, and she's an archaeologist, anthropologist, artist. Genius. I've got a certificate for that. She's a real one in Mensa. And sometimes she lets me forget it. But she said, well, if you look in the Anglo-Saxon, and she studied Anglo-Saxon, can read bits of it in medieval French, and it makes you sick. But she said, they said they wouldn't live in the Roman ruins because they were full of ghosts.
Huh.
Quote, that turns up all over the place. What does that mean? Well, if you've had the Comet whiz through, you've got 2 million dead, and you're an Anglo-Saxon just off the boat from the middle of Germany, and you walk into a city, and there's 3,000 people's bones sat in the middle of these ashes.
Yeah.
Would your wife really want to put her telly and her sofa in the middle of that? No. So we have a tradition all the way down that corridor where they built a town next to it, and they used the Roman ruins, and they probably had roofs on, or the roofs had gone, but you could have re-roofed it. I'm sure these things must have been pretty serviceable. We're only talking 100 years ago. I mean, if you go into Scotland now, you can see ruins that have been not used for 300 years, and if you put a roof on it, you could live in it.
Right.
But they didn't. They mined it, and they wouldn't live in there because of the ghosts. So, I did say that, so she's put a note under me. She's saying, I forgot to say about there were no rocks in heaven. I did say that, didn't I?
Yeah. Yes, you did.
Okay, so, that's why I think they didn't live there, because everybody said they were full of ghosts. They've come from the middle of Europe. They're taking the place over. Oh, here's a nice place. Oh, look, we've got water. We've got nice view. We've got an old city here. It's full of dead people,
A lot of dead people.
unburied dead people.
Yeah.
And I can't see, I mean, the guy with the big hat on and the sword, he'd probably just say, "Oh, sweep it out, it'll be fine." But I bet his wife would be going, not quite so keen on this. So I think that's why we have the people building basically nowhere near so serviceable houses right next to ones that have got plumbing and sewage.
Yeah. Huh. You said there were 3 parts to the comet. Where did the third part end up?
I think some people have got this wrong. Some people say the third part went towards Gaul, which would be France. Specifically, it's not Brittany, it's round to the east of that. Basically where you guys would think of as northern and central France, yeah? I don't think it did. The comet says, the writings say that the comet looked like a dragon when it split. Oh, that was interesting. Now, what's the symbol of Wales? Anybody tell you? Not the leak. I'm talking about on their flag. What's the symbol of Wales?
I don't know.
I don't know. It's a red dragon.
Oh.
Okay. They called this comet the Dragon Comet. Now, they called other comets other things. Spear Comet, so on. Right? This one was the Dragon Comet. There might have been 2 Dragon Comets just to confuse us all, but there's a Dragon Comet. Now, dragon, we know what a dragon is. Fire-breathing, bird-like creature, scales.
Sure.
It eats pretty maidens, all that kind of thing, yeah? Okay. Incidentally, that's another story. I've just made another connection, sir. Sorry. Oh, dear.
Well, good.
Penny's just dropped on something else. So, the original Welsh literal translation for the word for dragon is in 2 parts, and it means lightning stone.
Okay.
Now, can you think of a better description of an asteroid?
Not really. No. Or a comet. Yeah.
And the first time it appears to be used on a flag or on an emblem is then.
Huh. All right. Okay.
And I think I've just realised why the locals call White Horse Hill Dragon Hill. But I think that might be another story. I've just put 2 and 2 together, and anyway. So
Okay.
Where did the other one go? In the sky, it would appear that it said it had a shaft of light pointing towards Gaul. Well, we know that comets' tails fly away from the sun, don't we?
Yep.
Right. And I think they're talking about a forward fate. When a comet comes in towards the sun, the tail's away from it, isn't it? And when it goes round, it basically chases its own tail out. Yeah.
Right.
Well, I think they're talking about a shaft of light because there's no references outside Brittany that I can lay my hands on. I've looked very odd for anything outside Brittany, which is on the top left of France. In other words, it didn't go over France. It didn't even go over Brittany, but they could see it. Yeah?
Okay.
So I don't think it went there, which leaves me with only one other place it could go because of another sighting I know of, which didn't quite fit. And that would appear to actually put it in the southern states of America.
Really?
North of Mexico. But but not far north.
Like where specifically are you thinking?
Just north of the border.
Like Texas or?
Well, you've got a thing over there called the Zone of Silence.
Yeah, isn't that in Mexico?
Is it in Mexico?
I think it's in Mexico.
I thought it was just north of Mexico.
No, I don't think so. I think it's just south of the U.S. border.
Is it very close?
Yeah, I think it is very close.
Like what? Less than 60 miles?
I don't know exactly, but I know it's in Mexico.
It's not hundreds, is it?
No.
Right. Well, if from one of the other sightings from Ireland, which not many people seem to have picked up on, or maybe I've got it wrong, it would appear to have go north of the one that clipped Mexico.
Okay.
Maybe. There's one sighting that said it split into 4, but only one says that. So, I mean, I think the thing was just falling apart.
Right.
Now, the Zone of Silence is rather odd in that you can go in there from, well, Jerry Wells, the explorer filmmaker guy, says if you go in there with a compass, it just does its own thing. You go in there with a mobile phone, it stops. And
right.
I thought, yeah, the ones I buy are like that. And but I don't know. I haven't looked at that, but
that's certainly a possibility.
Well, if you had an enormous, supposing I haven't really found the smoking gun. I mean, where is the damn crater? Is there one? Did it just break up to powder? Is there a big hole somewhere? Did it bury itself under the ground? Did it drop in the sea like Jerry thinks and cause a mini tsunami that you can see the stuff on the side of the Andes? I mean, that's one bit, but I mean, just supposing you've got a heavy nickel comet coming in at a very shallow angle. Don't forget, this is all very shallow angle. It's following an orbit. It's coming in very shallow. So it's going to kind of dig itself in, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's not going to make a meteor crater like your famous ones you've got, yeah?
Right.
But I'm just wondering if you had a large amount of nickel in the ground, under the ground, in the Zone of Silence, I don't know.
Might cause some of the effects.
Well, it's a long shot and it's a guess, but it'd be rather nice, wouldn't it?
Because that's definitely a weird area right there.
Yeah, but it's on the flight path of a weird thing.
Yeah.
The other thing is, of course, that one, I won't mention his name, but somebody who's quite voluble in a lot of the forums, and he said, wow, I mean, there's engineering. What? Yeah. It comes right around over Norway, bang, bang, takes out Puma Punku, clean. Who aimed it?
Yes, who aimed it?
So, I don't know. I mean, you can argue it out with the Draconians or the Palladians or... I don't know. Well, that's basically it. Is there any bits I missed or any questions you got?
Well, Luke, you have any questions?
So, have there been any impact craters that have been found for the 3 pieces that you theorize?
In Britain, there would appear to be quite a lot of particles, yeah?
Okay.
I mean, lots of it. So it appears that, when you see pictures of a meteor breaking up in the sky and everybody goes, wow, isn't that pretty?
Right.
And it's all going into small bits. Somebody just handed me a note. Is what destroyed?
The Pope forgot to destroy his memo saying destroy the things. That's why we know.
Yeah, I did say that, Sal.
You didn't.
Oh, she's just saying the reason we know that the Pope told everybody to destroy all of the records is because the memo of him telling everybody to destroy the records survives.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you didn't mention that.
Okay, so that's what she...
I was actually wondering that, and I totally forgot to ask you about that.
No, that is that's in the papal record.
That's kind of funny, actually.
Because of his famous quote that there are no stones in heaven, so it can't happen, and that got repealed in 1811 when a load fell on Paris.
Wow.
So that's why we know that happened. So what great big lumps of things? Well, in Britain, what we seem to have is more like a roasting. It's more like, I don't know, taking a large ingot of steel and, red hot, white hot, and like pulling it through your house on a small trolley. And, where's the ingot? Well, I don't know, but I can see all the burn marks.
Right.
This thing would have appeared to have done, from what I can see, at least half an orbit. You with me on the way in?
Yeah.
I mean, presumably it did a couple more before it got there, but the first reference. There's one guy on the web, lovely fella, works very hard, tries and digs things, and he's trying to tell us all that it started at Puma Punku and ended up in Norway. But I'm afraid that just isn't what the witnesses say.
Right.
They say it went the other way. And his way, you'd have to have convergence of the bits, and I can't see how that would work.
Right, yeah.
So, no, great big bits. Well, just supposing it hit Lake Titicaca, you could expect a great lump of stuff in there to cause their mini tsunami. I mean, they call it a tsunami. From what I gather, it's about 14, 18 feet of mud. Yeah?
Yeah.
It's not,
And there could be buried under the lake at this point.
Well, it could be right in the lake, sat there.
Yeah.
Jerry seems to think, Jerry Wells, I mean, he went looking and trying to follow this up on his latest one to Bolivia. And he sort of got echoes of stories of a big tidal wave sometime around then. But, you're talking legends without dates and stuff. There appears to be Pacific bottom mud washed quite a long way up the Andes. I'm not talking about the stuff from when the Andes were created, you with me, but, stuff subsequent to that.
Right.
Quite a long way up. So there was a tsunami there at some point, but bearing in mind that it's on that great big fault that runs all the way down the west coast of America, you're probably going to get them anyway.
True.
But, Jerry reckons it probably, the payload dropped in the sea off Peru, Bolivia, somewhere there. I don't know. It's a guess, I suppose, but there are some local stories. What I didn't tell you was that along the flight path across the Amazon, I don't know if you know about these. Well, you've had Jerry on the show before, haven't you?
Yes.
Jerry and Kathy. Kathy keeps discovering hidden cities.
Yeah.
Don't you hate it when that happens? All the paperwork. I don't know how many she's found now, but they found a good half a dozen in the Amazon that unknown to Western documentation. So, and then you hear about the stories, and there are stories about all the crops failing for, about 10 years again. And their solution to that is, well, we've obviously got the wrong shaman, so we'll kill him. And we've obviously got the wrong king, so we'll kill him. The new one's not doing too much better, kill him. Screw this, we'll go somewhere else. So the historians say, but this happened about 900 to 1000 AD. To which Jerry says, how do they know? They haven't been there. Nobody's been there. Nobody's even put a spade in the ground. But that just ties in with something else they know. But I mean, those people were having good years and bad years, and good, who knows why people. But it would appear that the locals talk of a very, very bad time of famine at around the right time that the Bolivian thing disappeared and the Comet story in Britain appeared and the story in Mexico appeared. And the story, a lot of the people in Mexico walked away around that time, bad crops. A lot of people in Amazon walked away, bad crops. A lot of people in England walk away, get on boats, bad crops.
Right.
So it just seems very curious.
Well, yes, and it's a fascinating story, and we're just about out of time. So let's tell people also what you do. You run a company called Coastal Computing.
Yep, we do that. We have an office in Spain. We have an office here in Norwich, which is a nice, beautiful medieval city, complete with castle and ghosts and everything else in England. It is very nice, right? It really is.
And you also run deprogrammed radio.
Yeah, we run deprogrammed radio, which, some of you are already listening on it probably by the time you hear this. We run a 24/7 thing where we take what we find the best of the web, including Sirai's obviously being the best, and we time cycle it and make it available to people in Europe, and we make European shows available to people in America, and it seems to be working quite well.
All right. And if people want to reach you, what's the best way of doing it?
Info at coastal-computing.com or info at deprogrammedradio.com, all one word. Or John Chewter on Facebook will find me.
All right. Well, I thank you, John, for telling us this story, this theory, because you've been telling me about it for a while, and I've been wanting to get you on to talk about it because it's utterly fascinating.
Been a bit of a monologue, though. Sorry about that.
That's all right. It's pretty much necessary for you to give all this information. This is just a fraction of it.
Well, you can see there are lots of side stories on this.
Yeah.
I mean, you could go on for ages, and then the big problem is just there's too much. It's just too much to take in. Well, basically, you take the history from about 20 AD of Britain and rip it up.
Yeah. All right.
Okay.